So thank you. Our next speaker is going to consider the Golden Verses. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you very much. For many of us, when we hear the word Pythagoras, what comes to mind is an experience that we had in high school. And that would be the study of high school geometry. What comes to mind is perhaps a theorem, a way of logically providing the calculation of the hypotenuse of a triangle. Maybe some of us remember a literal interpretation of the tetractys, which you see in front of you today. It's possible that a few of us in high school heard about the music of the spheres, harmoniousness, the use of ratios, or maybe heliocentricity taught by Pythagoras, or perhaps the fact that he saw the globe as an earthly sphere. But always and forever, most of us are marked by a memory of the use of logic, premise, conclusion, proofs, rote memorization. There is, however, a theosophically inspired collation of his teachings. They're very few in number, about 70, brief statements, fragments that invite us to consider the mode of right living so that each of us can pursue an avenue of intuitive insight into sacred scriptures, into eternal verities. These few fragments were recorded from the memories of his students. They've been translated by scholars, studied by philosophers, scientists, artists, and students of theosophy alike. In many ways, they remind us of the process that H.P. Blavatsky used to record the fragments we now know and love as the voice of the silence. So the life and accomplishments of Pythagoras reveal far more than the cold math we remember from high school. And rather, we are invited into a world of effort, of endeavor to make our lives meaningful, to try to understand the divine plan, to see our place in it, and then work towards realization of that plan. Pythagoras was a contemporary of the Buddha, living between 570 and 495 BCE. He was born to a wealthy Greek merchant and wife. The Delphic oracle at Samos was used to study the life to come for the child, a life of wisdom and virtue, they were told. And there are legendary accounts of his travels and studies. Just as we've heard in the prior two talks, the Theosophical movement is made manifest in a line of sages and seers preserving and promulgating eternal verities. We know that we can look at the writings of Pythagoras, a blend of science, philosophy, and religion. We can look at the writings, the recordings of Pythagoras to understand practical right living. And we can begin to study them in the light of theosophy if we use the three objects of the Theosophical movement and the three fundamentals of the philosophy that we find in the TS and in the ULT. So how do these golden verses align with the works of the Guru Parampara chain of these sacred texts of humanity? What can we learn about right living from Pythagoras and his Golden Verses. Well, first, let's look at the three objects of the Theosophical movement. We know there are three. The first, the establishment of the nucleus of universal brotherhood of humanity without distinction of race, creed, or color. When we look at the life of Pythagoras and we study the mystery school that he established, the precursor of the Platonic movements, we see that his students were accepted as equal candidates with no consideration of caste, class, but rather with an eye toward individualized merit and motive of right living. His students early on included his wife and his daughters, and by the time of his death, there were at least 17 women counted among the 235 survivors. The mystery school was communal. Everything was shared: resources, possessions, meals. There was a balanced lifestyle that was established that would include one and all in a kind of chain of helpers, if you will, from the junior members to the esotericists or the senior students. The school's goal ultimately was to practice veganism, to honor health for the human body as a tool to be used, and to honor the sacrifice of the lower kingdoms that sustained the human body. So therein, Pythagoras lines up with that first objective of the Theosophical movement. The second objective of the Theosophical movement is to promote the study of world religions, philosophies, and sciences, both ancient and modern. So here we have a scenario in which we really don't have the symbology of poetry, the mysticism offered to the public, as we've just heard about with Lao Tzu, but rather what we see in the life of Pythagoras is that prior to establishing his mystery school at Crotone, he traveled and studied well beyond the confines of Greece and Italy. He was in India, where he was known as the Ionian teacher, or the Pitar guru, the father and teacher. He was in Egypt for 22 years, it's said, initiated and studying with the schools of Heliopolis, in which he was privy to what you see in this slide: math, astronomy, music, the mysteries. He traveled throughout Persia, studying with the Magi and their mysteries, the followers of Zoroaster. He was in Phoenicia, Chaldea. He studied all of the Hebrew sources. And it is said, according to Iamblichus, that he was even among the cults and the Ibernians in what is now the British Isles. This is reminiscent, isn't it, of the travels that H.P. Blavatsky conducted prior to 1875 of the Common Era. Like Blavatsky, Pythagoras brought together a bouquet of all the spiritual wisdom that he'd found in his trip, all of this eternal wisdom, and it was that he brought to the foundation of his schools, a blending of religion, philosophy, and science, ancient and modern within his own context. The third object of this theosophical movement that is eternal and unfolds among all peoples and all places is the investigation of the hidden mysteries of nature, the psychic and spiritual powers latent in humans. Pythagoras was a lover of wisdom, and it is said that it is he who coined the term philosophy as a purgation of the mind and emotions so that the pure light of immortal soul may freely shine through the limited vestures common to all men. His mysteries were shrouded in the symbology of numbers, geometric shapes, vibrations, if you will, symbols used in a soul language to communicate the relationship between the natural divine and the human state. He used the geometric shapes that we may recall from high school to symbolize the coming forth of a manifested universe from the unknown. He studied and taught astronomy, proposing the heliocentric universe, the spherical earthly globe, symmetrical and periodic orbits of the planets, proposing that Venus functions as both the morning and evening star. He fostered the use of intuitive divination and prophecy, the interpretation of dreams, always judged from within the soul, the heart of the human, from a meditative stance. He used music and sound as vibration to purify and calm the soul. But always and forever, what he created for his students, what he left as a mark for us, is the creation of a lifestyle to purify the body and purify and elevate the character of the personal man. He held with solidarity, self-control, philosophical knowledge, a life of moderation and individual perfectibility. He used therapeutic dance and exercise to create the health of the physical body, and he studied facial expressions, laughter, the magic of the sound transmitted by the human form. The students lived in a style in which there was contemplation and meditation upon awakening at dawn, and in the evening in what is now known as the Pythagorean retrospective, both periods of self-reflection. He said that one's authenticity is in self-knowledge, and he advised seeking intuitive insights coming through a healthy, balanced soul, mind, and body. His students went through 5 years of silence for concentration, devotional secrecy prior to beginning serious study with him. They were advised to fit themselves by study and otherwise to test their moral nature in reaction to praise, humiliation, to develop cognitive processing as perfect as possible, the use of their memory, concentration, one-pointedness, intuition. He taught them that the mysteries found within oneself through character development, concentration, and pure motive is possible if we can still the mind so that the heart can enable real learning. For the students of Theosophy, we're reminded of the Buddhist students, the Shravakas, the listeners who went through a period of silence so that they could observe and bring in the teachings of the master to consider within the light of their own hearts. Ultimately, Pythagoras condensed Eastern wisdom into mathematical symbols. He was faithful to the reflection of the ancient wisdom, And he was able to take the kind of sacred wisdom of the Gita, over 5,000 years old now, and to apply it to the mystery school for his own students, to those that would come later, names like Plato that we're so accustomed to. He taught that above all things, respect thyself, think before acting, rule by reason, practice justice in action. Never commit any shameful actions, neither with others nor in private with thyself. And for Pythagoras, each of the numbers represented a spiritual stage of development. We can envision the circle with a point in it. We can think of the tetractys again with the first one at the top, proceeding down through 2 dots, 3 into 4. And each of these spiritual stages of development were mystical. And yet, his golden verses are practical instructions to allow for the development of the temple that is the body, so that the fundamentals of the eternal theosophical line of pursuit can be understood. Now, through the TS and the ULT, we know there are basically 3 fundamental propositions of the philosophy of Theosophy. And we look at these very brief 70 statements of the golden verses of Pythagoras. And we look to see, do his sacred teachings line up with these 3 propositions that are said to be aspects of one grand reality? Well, the first fundamental certainly is the unknowable absolute as the root of universality. And he taught, know thyself. Why? Because at heart, the true nature of the human state, soul, is a ray of that one source. He stated that we should practice thoroughly all these things, meditate on them well, love them with all thy heart. It is they that will put in the way of divine virtue. I, Pythagoras, swear by him who has transmitted into our souls the sacred tetractys, the source of nature, whose course is eternal. And therefore we see that there was a unity in the potential of all students. There was a kindly brotherhood, a link, a bond, a oneness between the senior and the junior students. He taught that man, each individual, chooses and creates destiny, and advised that practicing the Greek golden mean is the way to accomplish a reality that includes, is based on, is rooted in the unity of eternal unity beneath all the changing forms and the varied phenomenon of the universe. For him, the circle represented absolute deity, a boundless infinitude, unchangeable existence, Venus, the pantheos. Deity was the prototype, the universal principle that Plato would later term the noumenal. For Pythagoras, the number 1 symbolized the manifestation of the ray of the monad emerging from that first world of being, aloka. The number 2 symbolized the substance, ethereal, evolving, proceeding, emanating from the source. The 3, 1 plus 2, represented the phenomenal universe or cosmos. And 4 was the emptiness, yet the fullness of the material plane. He taught of 7 rays, exemplifying the multitude, but maintaining unity in the diversity, the diffusion of universal mind through all things. And again, he continued to refer to it, him, who has transmitted into our souls the sacred Pythagoras, the source of nature in the absolute, impressed within each soul, because each soul is a radiant of the one. He used the equilateral triangle to demonstrate how spirit could become radiant, and through the duality of the male and female aspects, could eventually produce the base, the universal plane of productive unity that we share. He stated that the golden virtues are the most excellent, the most divine, and invited everyone to pray to the gods, meditate, contemplate on these deific essences to accomplish all intentions in life. For some of us, that might be symbolic of the great Jupiter, but for others, what might come to mind is the instructions of thy will be done of the Christ, as recorded in the book of Matthew. In the second fundamental, we cite the truth of the cycles of periodicity of this great oneness. That law is the immutable power of the divine to create. That act, each of us, so as the soul emulates the divine. We have the law of motion, cycles, orbits, spirals, the light wave of the collectivity of beings that come upon this plane. And during the 8 years of preparation, prior to the esoteric study with Pythagoras, we know that he advised his students to maintain a very gentle, devotional, periodic, cyclic way of life, day by day by day, one day at a time. And in that process of preparation, each would create his or own fate or karma. And death would have no dominion, for Pythagoras was teaching mentum psychosis, reincarnation, that in the human state, there were hierarchies of being, immortals, heroes, terrestrials, who were similar in nature to a deific symbol or perfection, a shade of egalitarian potentiality, beings full of knowledge, light, truth, the enlightened ones. And he taught that in the cycling of the day of each one of these school days, if you will, if there were daily practices of arising with a morning mantra, meditating at dawn to recall yesterday, prior to sharing breakfast, prior to a solitary walk in nature to harmonize reasoning with the sedate and calm and centered influence of great nature. That would be followed by a period of gym and exercise to build the health of the body so that it could become a vessel, a channel for the intuitive voice of the silence to come through. After a period of study, there would be a communal lunch of bread and honey. Visitors might come in the afternoon, family and friends. There would be a common shared dinner and oral readings in the early evening, followed by a meditation of a retrospective nature and an evening mantra. In this way, he aligned the future course of a medicinal lifestyle, of a physical lifestyle, of a spiritual lifestyle, an intellectual lifestyle, but always a mathematical law that pervaded everything universally, that the vibrations generated by any one of his students could affect the quality of the existence of all of them. It was based on his notion that the divine spirit radiates and diffuses in reasonable soul, in the watchfulness in word and deed. The movement of soul, the movement of the psyche, is according to the works of the universe, from principles to particulars. Plato would later teach, based on Pythagoras, that deity geometrizes, that the point is to the line and the diameter as contrasts are to the unity, that we can, as the chapter 11 of the Gita instructs, we can align the human soul back with the world soul through periods of karma and reincarnation, and gradually reach a point of balance, of art, of science, of music, of all aspects of life. And why? To evolve as individuals and to serve in the spirit of the Kuan Yin pledge. Now, the third aspect of the three fundamentals is that of evolution, the pivotal doctrine, the power of nature in man. Pythagoras taught, when thou hast made this habit familiar to thee, thou wilt know the constitution of the immortal gods and of men, even how far the different beings extend and what contains and binds them together. For him, evolution, cosmic and human, is absolutely parallel. The potentiality of power in the human state, the perfectibility, is a process of becoming. Enlightenment can be achieved by the consideration of sacred texts, of meditating on these sacred texts. Enlightenment can come from within. Man was symbolized as a pentacle, a self-conscious entity, an ether, a beam of balance. Spirit and matter were symbolized by the entwined triangles of the six-pointed star. The duality of male and female, expressed in yin and yang, was also in the teachings of Pythagoras. So how is this to be achieved? What was the advice for each of us to create a self-fulfilled and self-devised path? We were taught by Pythagoras that anger is a mortal sin, that equal-mindedness in the face of all events and experiences needs to be maintained, that temperance, sagacity, an ethical, plain, moderate way of life is what should be sustained, that we should avoid causing envy to develop in others. We're reminded of the words of the voice of the silence, to step into the shade, to make room in the sun for others. Right living, right ethics, placing spirit over mind, mind over body. These are the exemplars in our respect for elders, in our respect for the sanctity of married life, of ethics in all our productions, in all our business accomplishments. Justice was said to be the eternal spiraling motion of cycles, the in and out breathing of the cosmos as well as the human. And when, he said, after having divested thyself of the mortal body, thou arrivest in the most pure ether, thou shalt be a god, immortal, incorruptible, and death shall have no more dominion over thee. And how can we pursue that? We can pursue that through the sacred use of sound and how we use our laugh and our words, our voice. If the melodies of music that were said to be vibratory systems of healing, to understand that there is a tone of nature, the great gong of the Chinese, the zero of the abstract sound, the music of the spheres, the 7 tones of the scale, the 7 rolls of the planet. All of this unfolded in the schools, the mystical school of Pythagoras. So we're invited as individuals and as a collectivity into this chain, this circle, this spiral of ethical causation to make an oath to compassionate divine power. For good is the God of all beings. To esteem that is to be eminently good. When communicating that to another, we will actually be increased in it in ourselves. There's no stagnant water, there's no stagnant wisdom, as we're advised in the voice. As each of us gains insight through these sacred scriptures, we need to pour that wisdom forth in our thought, word, and deed, so that we can uplift all of the collective of the popular conscience. The examined life, perfectibility, the practice of love, knowledge of the truth, understanding the spiritual senses as well as the physical senses. If we begin to create for ourselves a daily lifestyle to surmount and vanquish the lower human passions, gluttony, sloth, lust, anger. These fragments of truth, recorded years and years after the demise of Pythagoras, are a mere reflection of the mysteries that we can imagine were shared with the esoteric or senior students. They were preserved by 235 loyal disciples. And Pythagoras would be proud that we could reduce that number to the perfect 10, a symbol of the eye of wisdom, a symbol of what life for soul can be in the human state. If only we live as one for all and all for one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judy. The words of Pythagoras points to the idea that, and as all the teachers down through the ages, that we all have within us the power to begin this journey of our evolution by our own self-effort, that it is not our conditions that hold us back from this study and this understanding and this expression, but it's our attachment to those conditions that prevent this growth. So we all have that power within us. So thank you, everyone.